think of Valheim, you probably think of this, or this, or this. But how about this? Well, this is where Valheim first started over 7 years ago. You think this is a Grey Dwarf? Well, how about this? What started as a very basic concept has evolved over the years into the game that we know and love. And so many people do love it. Over 5 million people bought Valheim in its first month, over 10 million just a year later, and it's reported at over 14 million units today. It's had over 400,000 Steam reviews, averaging out to very positive feedback for both recent and all-time reviews. Clearly, it's hugely popular, and yet many of its core fanbase have been highly critical of Valheim's development over the years. Some feel there's far too long between updates, and others have found the last couple of updates disappointing. So what is the real story of Valheim? To understand Valheim, it's important that we go very far back in time. Okay, maybe not quite that far, but certainly before its release. Lead developer Richard Svensson began working on Valheim in 2017. At that time, it was called Fade, which is Swedish for feud. Apparently though, it was too difficult for a lot of people to understand. I think the J in there was confusing people, and that's why the name was later changed. However, such was his belief in Fade that Richard left the game development company he was working for to work on it full-time in 2018. Later this year, he and his friend Henrik Tornqvist released an alpha of Valheim. As you can see, the game looked very different at that time, although Richard's vision for the game was never lost. This vision has remained strong throughout the entire history of the game. From the very early days, Richard knew what the end goal was for Valheim. Before its release on the 2nd of February 2021, the dev team consisted of just 5 people. Despite this, it had huge sales in its first month, which was highly unexpected by everyone. With all of this interest came extra pressure for the development team. All eyes in the gaming world were now on them. They had a huge number of people reporting bugs for them to fix. Remember, it is still in early access even today, and a ton of community feedback. Deciding what to do with the game at this point would have been difficult, especially as its popularity came as such a surprise. It was at this point that the initial roadmap for the game was reworked. They decided to now focus on a single update which they called Hearth and Home. This ended up being released on the 16th of September 2021. 7 months was a reasonable time frame for this update given the unexpected nature of the game's success and the problems that came with that. This update brought with it rideable loxes, a ton of new build pieces, and a whole host of new features, settings, and systems that made the game feel and play much better. It was a very popular update, and the active number of players speak for themselves. From an all-time peak of 500,000 active players, the Hearth and Home update reached over 100,000 active players at its peak. The problem was, the update wasn't big enough to keep these players engaged for a long time. Soon, it was back down to around 30,000 active players, and it stayed that way for over a year. Despite this, Valheim was awarded Game of the Year for 2021 by PC Gamer. This was, of course, a huge achievement, and personally one that I think was thoroughly deserved. It's now December 2022 and everyone is getting ready for Christmas. The tree is up, the stockings are by the fire, and Valheim fans have a very special present waiting for them, the Mistlands update. This update was big. It brought an entire new biome to Valheim and the addition of magic. It included 9 new creatures, a new boss, new dungeon, new food, new potions, new fishing, a ton of new build pieces, and a partridge in a pear tree. Or maybe that should be a Munin, since he was also added in this update. Mistlands was mostly well received, but it would be a lie to say that it was loved by all. One of the main criticisms from fans was that the biome was, well, too misty. Other people said the biome was too difficult, although that's probably just because they didn't watch any of my guides properly. Jokes aside though, the biome is more difficult. It's a late game biome in a combat heavy progression Viking themed game. Most people seem to agree that the biome was a big challenge, but also a lot of fun. It's unique, and it is truly majestic. The beauty of this biome is worth seeing just in itself. So for those who say it's too difficult, well, maybe y'all just need to get good. This update had a fall off of active players, as you'd expect. However, it was now averaging around 40,000 active players until the next update, so this was a considerable improvement. Imagine a fiery Viking hell with undead mobs, impossible dungeons, water so hot that it burns you, and a boss fight that is accompanied by rock music. Welcome to the Ashlands update. released in April 2024. Now, I have to say up front, I'm going to find it hard not to be biased about this because I absolutely loved this update. It's hard to summarize everything this update brought with it because there was a lot. Some would say that a big update is what you'd expect, given it took them over 16 months to make it, and that is fair enough. But Ashlands certainly delivered. Over 30 new weapons, new armor sets, 70 new build items, incredible new dungeons, mobs, and a boss that absolutely blew me away. And that's just to list a few of the new things. So how did the fans react? Well, the active players did increase, but only up to 81,000 this time. Time had passed, many new games were released, and some people were just done with Valheim. There was a steady number of active players, around 40,000 or so, that stayed with the game from this most recent update until the present. It's easy to look at the peak number of active players and say that Valheim is dead now in comparison. However, the average number of players between updates is growing slowly. Valheim seems to be the game that everyone tries, but only a few play continuously. A large number of players return every update, try it out, stick with it for a time, and then move on. Some people like to play the game daily and others just once a year, and that's fine. It's clearly a game that has a huge number of people who enjoy playing it, no matter how often they enjoy playing it. That being said, there are some legitimate criticisms that people have of this game, and I'm going to address them one by one. The biggest complaint I've seen is that the content of the updates is not worth the time it takes for them to be released. Whilst this is of course subjective and opinions will vary from person to person, let's look at both sides of this argument. There have been 3 major updates since Valheim's release in 2021, those being the Hearth and Home, Mistlands, and Ashlands updates. There have also been a number of smaller updates, such as the Frost Caves, Hilda's Request, and the Bog Witch. On top of that, there have been a ton of small updates, but they mostly involve just bug fixes or minor changes. We waited 7 months for Hearth and Home, 15 months for Mistlands, and then 16 months for Ashlands. The medium and smaller updates happened in between, but critics would say that they didn't really contain enough to count as significant. Again, that is of course debatable, but let's focus on the bigger updates. One of the reasons it takes a long time for an update to be released is because the development team is fairly small. What started as 5 people when Valheim was first released is now still only 13 people today. You could argue that with sales totaling over $188 million US, they could hire more people. I'll talk more about the financials in a moment, but to address this point, maybe there's a very good reason that they don't hire extra developers. There's an old saying that a camel is a horse designed by a committee, meaning that one person's vision is beautiful, perpetual, and perfect. Maybe when creating art, one should be a total fascist. If too many people input their ideas, that initial concept becomes changed and is perhaps lost forever. Richard Svensson had an idea, one that he committed to and worked on for years. Maybe the dev team is kept small so that this idea can be better preserved. Communication between people is much easier the fewer there are. With all devs on the same page, their solo projects tie into a much larger philosophy that is Valheim. You see, Valheim is not just a game. It is one man's dream that came true, and the beauty of Valheim is in this truth. It is a work of art and passion, not one of economics and scale. Yes, Iron Gate could have expanded its team to 50 people, made a small update every month, and had many more players than it does today. But perhaps Valheim should stay as it has always been, an indie game, so that Valheim 1.0, when it is released, satisfies the initial intended trajectory of the game. Just to talk about the financials briefly, there are a few things that must be addressed. Firstly, the gross sales number of $188 million US does not factor in any costs. Iron Gate works with the publisher Coffee Stain, who will take a cut of every sale. This percentage can vary widely, but as Valheim is an indie game, it's likely that they had to sacrifice a significant percentage of each sale. It's also sold on Steam, and Steam also take a cut of every sale. Steam will take 30% for the first $10 million in sales, 25% up to $50 million, and 20% thereafter. As such, it's not fair to say that Iron Gate have hundreds of millions of dollars sat in a bank account. That is simply not true. What we can say is that the company has of course been a very profitable company because of the sales from Valheim. The truth is though, they are profitable because they made a fantastic game that people love, and what they do with the money that they generated is entirely up to them. The game's price varies by country, but it's $20 in the United States. For that, you have an incredible game and free access to all of its updates, rather than them being paid expansion packs. There's no pay to win or even buyable cosmetics within the game. You get the entirety of the game and its future for that $20. When you bought the game, you paid that price for the game as it was, and also for the promise of future updates, which you have had. These may have taken longer than you wanted, but they never promised Valheim 1.0 would be done by a certain date. Personally, I think Valheim is great value for money, and they still do regular sales of up to 50%. Given the game's popularity, they don't have to do that, and they could have even jacked up the price over the years. That being said though, there is one thing about Valheim that does annoy me. Multiplayer on Valheim was something the devs promoted from the early days of its release, telling us how we could explore new biomes and take down bosses as a group. The game accounts for this by making the boss harder and having it drop more items to balance the multiplayer experience. It also increases the local difficulty of mob spawns based on how many people are in that area. So clearly it was intended there would be a significant amount of multiplayer gameplay. Unfortunately, 4 years later, the multiplayer experience is still very laggy. I've run a server for over 3 years now, and we've had some amazing times on there. Some of the best builds I've ever seen players create in vanilla Valheim have been on my servers, and viewing them is always an absolute pleasure. However, it's hard to view them because the game lags so hard when you do any significant building or terraforming. I think that is a real shame, because in between updates, building and playing with other people are two things that would keep the player base more engaged. We've had over 25 people in the same area on my server before, and it becomes almost unplayable with the lag. Compare that to, for example, Minecraft servers, where you can have thousands of people online simultaneously. If the multiplayer experience were better, there would be tons of public Valheim servers that were free to play on. There would also be lots of unique servers where you could play Valheim in different ways and maybe have Valheim games and things like that. All of this would help to keep players interested for much longer, and would result in a much larger player base overall from generating more sales. I think the neglect of the multiplayer experience and the instances that result from large builds are the developers' biggest failings. Whilst I really hope they work on this in the future, I don't really hold my breath, as it's been 4 years already without improvement. So that brings us up to Valheim in the current day. Multiplayer issues aside, the game offers numerous ways it can be enjoyed. From adventuring, to building, to combat, it has something for everyone. The dungeons are varied and offer challenging, exhilarating experiences. The progression through the bosses is full of surprises and significant rewards, although we all know the motor ability needs to be for much longer. Journeying through the biomes offers a wide array of landscapes for you to enjoy and build in. The game is fun and offers a great many hours of playtime value. It has a slowly growing average player base and some great communities. Within these communities, we have a ton of Valheim mod makers too. These guys work hard to make and maintain mods for those who want to expand on their Valheim experience. So a big thank you to these guys. Modded Valheim is very popular among a small population of players. It offers a way to enjoy the game in a huge number of different ways, and adds an incredible amount of playtime for those who enjoy using mods. For me personally, the Valheim journey has changed my life. I went from being someone who did YouTube as a hobby to someone who creates content full time. This was my dream for many years, and it came true, thanks in large part to Valheim. I also love playing the game and appreciate how many hours of happiness it has brought to my life. Further to that, I have met some truly incredible people. My servers have had such a strong community for so many years that I've made friends through this game. I've met some of the most altruistic, decent, amazing people, and I thank each and every one of them for being part of the community that we have. Valheim was a game I found by accident. I fell in love and decided I'd make a tutorial on how to sleep through the night. This led to a Valheim obsession spanning hundreds of videos, thousands of subscribers, and millions of views, including my first and to date only video to pass 1 million views. These milestones, the people I've met, and the adventures we've had are memories I will have for life. So will I ever say Valheim is anything other than an incredible game? No. As for the future of Valheim, the next update will be the Deep North. This is the final piece in the world biome puzzle, unless they decide to do an ocean update. Or is it? I've always said that they could make dimensions to other biomes, or perhaps the world map that we see could be flipped over to reveal the same amount of biomes all over again. Maybe that's just wishful thinking about a game that I love and hope will never end. Either way, Valheim, I thank you and all of your developers. I thank your fans, your musical composer, and everyone else involved with the game. One day, Valheim will be a happy memory in the minds of millions. People will sit around fireplaces sharing stories of the great times they had playing Valheim. Right now though, with the game not yet at full release, perhaps we have only ascended so far to the base camp with the greater, more exhilarating journey to the summit still to come. I'd just like to say a really big thank you to anyone who has got this far through this video. This video was a passion project really for the Valheim convention. I wanted to do something a bit different and just cover a bit of Valheim's history and everything up to date in a game that has been so transitional, so transformative, so amazing for me and for so many other people I know who are watching this and who have been part of that journey. I hope you're having a great time at ValCon. I think that's when you're first going to see this. In the comments below right now, please do share with us your experiences, your memories, your thoughts on Valheim. We'd all very much like to experience that and to know, what everyone else thinks of this game as well. But thank you for watching today, and Skål!